Hey everybody, and welcome to Get Your AI On, the podcast. I'm Cristian Olarasu, and this podcast is brought to you by Morphle, the AI platform for e-commerce. I'm the host of the show, and every episode I invite founders, entrepreneurs, business leaders, and even AI researchers to share with us their experience in dealing with business problems that can be solved through intelligent use of data.
This is special episode number 18.
Let's get your AI on.
When you're starting from, in the typical data world, you start from essentially one massive database of millions of data points across lots of different people. Mm-hmm. So what if you turn that the other way around, that you start with holistic and rich data points on an individual level? And how can you essentially model based on that? And you're absolutely right to tear at this problem, because it's not trivial. And that means that, for example, it's something that's as compute and data intensive as machine learning. You have to kind of break it down. So one of the things at the end of the day, I try to kind of think about it from a big picture and then also like a small picture point of view. And I think from the small picture point of view, you can do a lot with very basic modeling, like with very, very basic, like 80-20 rule type of data. You can actually create quite a lot of good indicators for merchants. So this is one of the things that's really really important for us, that if essentially somebody uses this system, they have to get value right away, not in 90 days or 180 days. It has to be right away, that when the user lands on the site, then you know a little bit more about the user, and then you can provide more value for the user. And for the user, it has to be one click and then value. It can't be any more, difficult than that. So you can start off with very basic things, like you take 10 data points. Like if you're able to validate and cross-check 10 data points, like age bracket, income bracket, demographic, where they live, some of the interesting groups and events and so on and so forth that they engage with. I mean, you already know quite a lot. And if this is data that you can trust, for example, it's aggregate data over the last year, like this person has been at, 17 events that kind of fall into this category. This person has, spent X amount of dollars in this category, yada, yada. Not exposing any raw data, not exposing anything sensitive, but just kind of, this type of behavioral data. That's already quite valuable. But now you're absolutely right that for essentially training a predictable and statistically significant model, that's something where essentially it does require various different steps. But for us, a lot of the things that we start with is just very primitive access to holistic data. And then from there, I think that you can do a lot of different, more sophisticated things. But this is also like just kind of thinking also kind of back, like what we did in for example, the fintech company I ran. We worked with a lot of anti-money laundering and compliance systems. And that's something where, for example, if you have to, work with, for example, anti-fraud or money laundering or so on, then I mean, at that stage, you work in rules and thresholds. Like you work with statistical significance, you work with pattern recognition, and all these different things. So I think that's absolutely important. But at the same time, just thinking about where the merchants are today, and thinking about like how can we help them take one step, in the right direction, and then one step beyond there and one step beyond there. Then the first thing is just essentially that if we can give them access to better data so that they can provide better value, that's already essentially a game changer. And then from there, they can essentially optimize and they can train and so on and so forth. But this is kind of where the open collaboration comes in as well. That, for example, Kimmo, who's our CTO in our company, he's ran 3 data companies, and he's somebody that in his PhD he studied neural networks in the late 90s. So these are all things that we're kind of also grappling with internally, that we're thinking about, like, if you start with the individual and you have lots of different individual, like you have millions of individuals, how do you do that kind of instead of essentially starting from one database with millions of data?
Okay.
And I think Google has also been very visionary in this sector. I mean, of course, they have a lot of insight about kind of trends, and they have a lot of different kind of projects in the works. They also have lots of open source libraries and so on and so forth. But that's actually a really, really cool and just very specific point about federated learning, that That's something that we're also looking into. And I think that there are a lot of these types of initiatives that as we get into kind of the new era of things, then they'll just become more and more viable because, for example, third-party cookies being depreciated. That's not a small thing. That's going to be quite a big thing.
So I did my homework, well, sort of, but I did browse the news vendor problem. But it's essentially what I want to understand. If the uncertain demand also refers to times such as the ones we're going through right now, or this news vendor model is appropriate for slight variations in demand, not outliers, let's say.
So that's actually a very good observation about all of these classical operations research models. In the old days when there wasn't really a lot of data available, most of these models that people worked with started with, the demand is this, and it's usually just a random variable, a distribution that is given to you. Now, obviously, in real life, no one gives you that demand distribution for free. So actually, a big part of how you would use these models in practice is figuring out what the inputs are to these models. And estimating demand is definitely one of the first things that people need to deal with, or estimating whatever other inputs you're using in your models from real data. So with regards to your question, right, I think such a model will be useful in these days as well, if you're using the right demand, which you would have to sort of estimate on these times that you call outliers, as opposed to just using the same demand you would use in normal times. I actually think the bigger difference in these times compared to usual times is the trade-offs. I think in these times, as I was alluding to before, what changes is that really you don't want to run out of stock. Like and this is actually common to retailers in general. The cost of not meeting demand is usually outweighs the cost of ordering too much by a lot. But in these times, I imagine it's even more debalanced. Like you really don't want to lose demand on some items or the essential items, and on the other items you probably just don't even carry them anymore. So this trade-off between how much you want to satisfy demand and the cost of ordering too much, usually in this model in particular, is really summarized by the service level you want to guarantee. So if you want to meet 95% of the demand, then you order a given amount. If you want to satisfy 99% of the demand, you order more. And this service level is in practice really set by managers based on intuition about the business. But more rigorous formulation is really given by the cost of not meeting demand and ordering.
We discussed about the stage of the company when hiring a product manager makes sense. But when product operations becomes a bottleneck?
So I think the first thing is to define what product operations is. So product operations is, it's a side team. So you don't necessarily manage product managers or product owners, but you come in with two big mandates. The first one is making sure that the product team and the product management team is well equipped to do their job. So do they have the right tools? Do they have the right process in place? Do they have everything they need to be successful, to do their work frictionless, in a frictionless way? So that's the first thing. So it's very tooling oriented and process oriented. The second portion is more of a coaching and mentoring aspect, where you share best practices. So at Element AI, I created the product management guild so that we could meet every week and share learnings. And so it's kind of a support role to a head of product or a VP of product who manages these people. And you come in to help the VP of product and the product management team on a horizontal fashion. Typically, product operations will only happen once you start to have a very complex product organization. So you have a product portfolio, let's say maybe more than 3 or 5 products. And so a VP of product is really looking at the roadmap and making sure everything's orchestrated And that person might not have as much time to worry about processes and tooling, and also coaching and mentoring. So obviously there's coaching and mentoring happening as well on the executive side, but it also helps to kind of create a horizontal layer of health.
Take this next question out of context. It might sound really funny. What is soap? Why should we know about it, and where can we get more of it? And yes, soap is not the thing you use to wash your hands with. It's actually a framework that Paul created. Tell us more about it, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tongue-in-cheek joke. Our company is called Bain Public, which in French translates for public bath, and we always feel that companies need to use hygiene on their roadmaps. So we often joke that it's time to clean your product roadmap. So that
clever,
so we're playing with the idea of cleaning, and we said, well, if you want to give your product the care it deserves, then you need to use soap. And so we created this methodology, which is a 12-step methodology. It's it's nothing clever. It's basically an aggregation of a number of things that we do as product managers all into one. For that basically allows companies to go from we have no product roadmap to we have a product roadmap. And this framework, basically, we called it SOAP. Because it's all about roadmap prioritization, product strategy. So the S stands for strategy, right? And so we used to have ability to be able to tell you what SOAP stands for. I completely forgot though at this point, because I think that we just started using it as what it is. Really, it's just it's a way to start fresh, a way to basically use soap to remove the dirt and continue building the right.
What do you think, or maybe you've experienced it yourself, is the most surprising thing for a marketer when coming in contact with an AI project or product for the very first time?
It's not that complicated. I think that's the most surprising find, because if you sit down and talk to someone who really understands AI really, really well, they will be able to explain it to you in a way that makes sense for a non-technical person. They will tell you in simple analogies what AI does and how it works, and how that is very similar to, in certain extent, how you as a human being make decisions, or how your brain works, and how you process information and you look at new information with the lens of your previous experience and try to categorize in most cases, or build new things in other cases, depending on what kind of AI you're talking about. But it's not too dissimilar from other parts of life that we're very familiar with, which we do every single day. When we show up to work, or we talk to people, we choose to go to a party or not. And this is actually an example that one of our senior AI people talks about every time. Is the decisions that come into play when you're deciding whether to go to a friend's party or not are actually a combination of sub-decisions in your previous experiences with the group of people that will be there, if you're feeling well that day, if that last interaction with your friend was a good one, if you're looking to do something there specifically, or if the train ride or car ride is not too far away, or if you have other plans that are likely to yield better rewards that are competing with that. So that was a very interesting example, and I think that's the kind of examples that help non-AI people understand what AI does. It's not the black box, it's not magic.
I know that you've been involved with a lot of product teams over the years, and what are some of the most important roles you believe such a team should consist of?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Especially if it's an AI company at core. And maybe, you've been a founder and an entrepreneur, maybe talk a bit about these teams as relative to the stage of the company, from startup to scale up company to maybe enterprise, the size of Nike.
Okay. I think let's first talk about the different thing. I think it's useful to talk about the maturity of the technology and product organizations in those companies. And let's say you have at one extreme, not extreme, at one end you'll have traditional companies and at the other end you'll have the Amazons of the world, and in between you'll have things like Walmart or Target or something like that. Now, depending of where you are on the scale, you're going to approach problems related to, let's call it data and automation and AI research differently, because most probably it won't be core to your activity, or maybe it will. So the chances of being very different from between the three buckets are pretty high. Now, assuming that the AI department is not really set up yet, it's a very different approach in my experience than traditional product management on how to build those products. Because, like, think about it, it's instead of going after features and wireframes and customer discussions, you're building things with one of the biggest scopes in collecting data and getting more input for your system. And at the same time, internally inside the organization, it's very hard. It's very hard. Like, everything around AI is expensive, from hiring to educating everyone to getting expertise on board, to iterating and teaching the organization that there's no big launch moment. It's an optimization problem, and you have to work for it, and you have to change your mindset as an organization. So that is built gradually, in my experience. And the best way to build it is, you kind of want to start small, but with something that has a pretty large business impact, and something that's feasible also. And even for that thought, you have to bring a lot of people together inside the organization. You need data science, you need data engineering, because most of the work is in data engineering before people can mingle with that data. You need your researchers. You need, in some cases, you need design involved. You need the product teams involved. You need the domain experts that will tell you and educate you on the business feasibility. You'll need the technical experts that will educate you on technical feasibility, and so on and so forth. And then you'll have to pitch it to executives or senior leaders, and you kind of have to link it to the AI strategy if the company has one, or you have to just build the strategy at the same time so your project is successful. I don't know. I think it varies a lot. But I would say, like, to summarize it, I think in most organizations, they require a lot of executive leadership education. It's almost impossible to start with a big bang. So you have to figure out a way to start small, but pick something that has pretty that can either be scaled or has a pretty big business value. Otherwise, no one will listen to you or your project or your strategy. And the last one is the mental model in product management kind of flips a bit, and that needs again iteration and learning.
For those that want to understand the end game for AI technology, I strongly encourage them to read the AI Republic. It's on Amazon. And honestly, there are many things that resonate with me, from the AI versus IA analogy, big data versus right data, or the MAP, minimum algorithmic performance. I think these are important notions and concepts, and to be understood for any leader out there that wants to incorporate AI into their organization. What are 3 actionable takeaways you'd want entrepreneurs or executives or managers to remember after reading your book, and immediately be able to apply to their startups or organizations?
Okay. I think the first thing that one needs to understand is this: the most important part of of AI is not the model itself. In a couple of articles that I wrote, we wrote, we always use if you think about AI, is essentially an AI model. A good AI model is like a performance car engine. You can have you can have a Lamborghini Ferrari engine, but you need the rest of the Ferrari. You need the rest of the Lamborghini in order to go from point A to point B. So the key is actually not to focus on the AI model itself. As a matter of fact, lots of companies actually buy AI models from the other vendors, now, because there's so many AI, developers. Again, it all depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to actually go and try to beat like a deep mind when it comes to the game of Go, that's a completely different story than, you're trying to use AI to deal with customers' questions online, right? So, it's a very, very different thing. So, think about not about the AI model itself, but the rest. That is the key to success, is to get the rest correct. You can do it yourself. I'm not asking you to do it, or you can actually get vendors to work closely with vendors to make sure that the so-called production environment is actually up to scratch. So think about that, because no matter how much how many POCs and pilots you do, if you have not got anyone to help you to implement, you won't be able to handle it. The second actionable takeaways, right, I believe is, do not even think that you need to collect enough data in order to actually run AI projects. It's not. Because what really matters is what exactly you are trying to achieve.
The use case.
So in the case let's say if all you're doing is actually getting a model to make sense and read and understand and extract the data from a driving license, that's easy, okay? Because driving license, the data is always in exactly the same place. Whereas, if you're asking, a machine to actually make sense out of bank statements coming from different banks, they all have different formats, that's a slightly different story. Now, what we're now doing these days is, in the case of when you do not have enough data, you can already start to synthesize it. We create for you, right?
Correct.
It is not terribly difficult, because all you need to do is to actually make sure that all you need to do is to have certain set of data to start with. And then what we do is we'll make some changes to the data that you have got, current data you have got, and then we'll push it to actually train to the model to be to be more accurate, or to be more able to read, to read the document.
And of course, it's not perfect, but at least it's a starting point, right?
Oh, it's not perfect. You know what? You came up with a very, very important point. Very, very important point. Do not even think for a moment that it will be perfect. If you get 100%, if someone is telling you that you can get 100% out of it, the person is lying to you, because for whatever you they can do, it's not going to be 100%. And you have to actually understand, the fact that you will never be able to get to 100%. So my third takeaway is this: think about what percentage is actually acceptable. A lot of things you don't need 100%, right? If you are just checking documents, you don't need 100%. If you are using AI to diagnose cancer, probably you would want to look at 100%. Or you're using AI to decide whether someone should go to jail or not, probably you're looking at 100% accuracy. But in many cases, you don't really need 100% accuracy.
So in your book, Creating Value with Artificial Intelligence, you're talking about a very good framework of identifying use cases and problems that can be solved through intelligent use of data. In fact, it's a set of features that make the collaboration between humans and machines work. Can you dive a bit deeper into it and give a few examples?
Absolutely. So I think the framework, what I'm talking about is that start with the why, start with the problem, right? So why do you want to build a solution? And this is a lot of companies, a lot of startups say, we want to use AI. I mean, that's the wrong place to start. So first you have to start it, okay, is there a problem that is worth solving using machine learning or technology? Or in general technology, but also AI and machine learning, let's say, because and how to identify the right problem. And I say that first of all, identify problems that have huge human error, or the existing error in those ways you are solving is quite high, for various reasons could be, and then see if there are patterns. Once you have these things that you can see there are repeat patterns, that how currently the problem is solved, there are potential repeat patterns and there are high errors, then go and look out for the data to solve those problems. Because a lot of times, again, company make this mistake that they first start with the data. They say, okay, we have this data, what can we do with this data? And I always say that's a wrong approach, because then you are limiting yourself to the data that you already only have, rather than trying to look at, okay, there is, rather than starting from a problem which might require other data that you may not have, but you only start with, if you look at only the data you have, then you will ignore the data out there, which may be publicly available, and you can get that data anyways. So I think that the framework for me is very simple. Start the problem, identify if there are patterns, and then look for the data that you have. And then, of course, once you select the right problem, know what data to collect or what data you have, then go and overcome the challenge with
I have this notion, and I've had it for a while, that every single company should have a game designer. Not in, I mean, also a designer in terms of art, but a game designer in terms of mechanics, designing mechanics for games. I've come to like a realization that game designers are some of the most cognitively flexible and productive and creative people I've met. And because making mechanics for games is in some ways a very general, basic way of building an organism and how that organism functions. And when you look at it from this perspective, every company is an organism, whether it's on the human level or on a technology level or on the product level. There's always parts that interact in a way, like we said before, tree and the forest. And game designers, I find, have always very insightful comments on various different parts of whatever it is you're doing, whether it's an autonomous vehicle company or a marketing company or a I don't know, a machine learning company that does recommender engines, like we said before. I find that, so that's my first part of the answer. Every company that deals with AI or any sort of digital technology, or I'm going to out on the limb and say every company should have a game designer. Even if you have a chain of stores. Yeah. So one was the game designer. Second was somebody who understands the technology at a foundational level. So let's call it an expert engineer. And then what I don't know if this translates to other, like I have somewhat good insight into games because that's where I kind of grew up in the industry. I don't know if the role of a producer is a thing across various specters of industries, but basically in the games industry, there's this joke that the job description of a producer is buys lunch. And it's a nice ridicule of a certain social skill set that I think it's absolutely crucial in an organization, which is somebody that sees and realizes and also in a way manages all the subtle little team dynamics between people, right? Because one of the issues, for example, that we have sometimes, not all the time, was that if you're dealing with very specific engineering stuff, more often than not, you're going to have people who don't know how to deal with social anxiety, who don't know how to deal with social pressures, problems, etc. And if you're somebody that for the vast majority of your life were in your room coding on problems, and now all of a sudden you're part of an organization and you don't know how to solve like simple little problems, like if somebody took your coffee mug accidentally, and I as a person, I'm gonna keep having to put out fires because of you, you're useless to me, right? Because no matter how genius you are as an engineer, there's going to be more effort to make everything going than what your results will produce. So that's why I think the third role, as whatever it is you call the producer in other industries, and the manager is not a proper word for this, because usually what manager means is somebody who misplaces trust and uses all sorts of leverage to make people do whatever it is at hand. So the point being is how you identify the nuances in dynamics in the team, so that conflicts and fires don't even come up, right? So in a way, it's like a teacher in a elementary school class, where if you don't react to certain things fast enough in a proper manner, all of a sudden you will have a fire in your classroom that you're not going to be able to put out without resorting to authoritarian measures, which are always, in my opinion, make you look impotent and lose a certain amount of prestige, right? As many times as you have to raise the voice and go all monkey-like,
Yeah.
you're just losing, prestige and a certain level of respect. So I think that's the third crucial part. Besides, of course, all the usual suspects, of having somebody who can communicate the ideas, somebody who can operate the ideas, sort of scrum master.
I know that you're collaborating with both academia and health experts. And I wanted to ask you, what are some of the do's and don'ts of conducting this kind of research based on your experience? Is there a difference between doing research in academia versus a deep tech startup where speed is of the essence? Do you feel there's a difference in approaches or maybe speed?
Yes, I do believe there's a difference in both. So speed definitely is a huge difference. Another difference is the direction and the process based on milestone and having a specific goal. Sometimes fundamental research, you do research, but you're not sure where it will lead you. But when you're doing it for a business and to address a specific need, well, you have a specific objective, so you cannot just go with the flow. You have those objectives that you need to respect in a specific time frame. So this is this is the main difference. However, we believe that having partnership with academia is a great thing, because there's all this knowledge. There are people who are working for many years or even decades on some topics. So it would be a shame not to leverage this existing knowledge. So for us, the very important point was that when we meet with potential partners, to really filter for that attitude aspect towards how they feel about reaching milestones and respecting a specific timeline, and how they feel about that. Is it something that seems to excite them, or is it something that you see that they're really not comfortable with? So when we see that it's something that excites them and that they feel that they are part of something concrete that
they are part of a journey that will lead to market adoption in pretty short period of time. Some of them are really excited about that, and it can lead to great partnerships.
All right, this was Get Your AI On podcast. Thank you all for listening, and be sure to subscribe. We're going to post a new episode every other week, so stay tuned for the next conversation. See you next time.